Hi. So today I'm going to be making a homemade spackle with a little bit of a recipe that I found online from FCA Publishing, and they recommend that I use flour, salt, and a paint or primer. This is the first time I'm making this, so we're going to see how this goes. You can use it to fill small holes in a wall, or in my case, I'm making a miniature woodworking project. This is a scale model, but prior to painting it, I want to fill all those holes so I have a nice smooth edge on it, just so it looks a little bit nicer. So let's get started. It says that I need 4 tablespoons of white flour. I also need a cup to mix it in. Level those off. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Next thing I'll need is 1/3 tablespoon of salt. I don't have a third on here. I have a 1/4. It's 0.25. I'm looking for 0.33, so I'll go a little bit over this. Kind of how I cook too. We'll get close enough. So 0.25 heaping will get us pretty close to, I think, 0.3. So we'll go ahead and throw that in there. And next it says add enough paint or primer until the concoction has a doughy or putty-like texture. So I kind of like to think of it as like a peanut butter consistency, smooth peanut butter that will fill in there without actually dripping out. And this is just some trim paint that I had. Make sure that it's mixed well. A little bit of a paint skin on there, that's okay. Disposable tools would be a good thing to use, not ruining the family silverware. Looks like I'm going to actually need quite a bit, so I'll pour a little bit in there and then start mixing. Protect your surfaces. Just put some paper down there. Yeah, I'll need quite a bit of that. Okay. Stir that around. Getting there, you kind of see some of that consistency starting to thicken up a little bit. Kind of feels like I'm making pancakes. And it dried out, and I'll need to add more water if I were making pancakes. In this case, I'll add some more paint. Okay, so this is starting to look pretty good. Kind of see the consistency here. All the flour is wettened, which is important. No dry spots in there. Okay, and because I'm working with a scale model, I'm trying to get some scale tools. So I have a plastic knife here. I have a popsicle stick. I also cut the end of it so it's flat with just a small model saw that I have here, so it'll act more like a putty knife. I actually have a putty knife, but we're going to see if we could use it with some regular household things. See a couple dry spots in here, so I'm going to add a little more paint and stir that around. And I imagine I should probably work fairly quickly before this dries out. Alright, I'll keep that spoon in there and see what my little pretend putty knife can do. I'll get you a little bit of a close-up here. Start filling those holes. And the good part of this kind of right angle that I have here, I can kind of scrape that excess off and fill all those areas. And I'm going to continue to do that until I have that pretty smooth on all sides. Now what I'm finding is because it's fairly thick, I kind of really need to press it into the open areas so it fills well. And if you've ever done any sheetrock or taping or even gluing and woodworking for that matter, you'll know that the more you clean up while it's wet, the better time you're going to have once it's dry. It'll be a lot less sanding, a lot less prepping. So I'm going to do the same thing. Take your tool and you'll scrape any excess off that you don't need from all prepped areas. And you want to do this before it dries, otherwise it'll be a pain to get off. And then I have just a wet rag here, a small wet rag for my case. I want to make sure it's not too saturated because I am dealing with cardboard here. And then I'm just going to wipe off any more of that excess and make sure that it remains nice and smooth on the areas that I want to remain nice and smooth. So I pretty much have the top done and filled, and I will do the same for any remaining sides or legs on my model project. So I filled in all the visible sides best that I can, and all these same rules apply if you're repairing a small hole in a wall. So if you don't have paint and you prefer to use something that's a little bit cleaner, look online and see what you could use. Cornstarch is an option, toothpaste they say is an option, and what I'm hoping, much like if you were actually using joint compound and mudding a wall or taping, I'm realizing that I'm probably going to need more than one coat. So once this dries, I hope it's going to be sandable where I could smooth it off and put one more finishing coat on that. Until that happens, so my mixture doesn't dry out and I can reuse it, get some plastic wrap, and you really just want to make sure that it's getting as little air as possible so that will stay and I can reuse that once this actually dries, and I will hopefully sand and add a second coat soon. So the first coat is actually dried. It took a little bit longer than I thought it would take to dry because it was kind of thick, not like a regular thin coat of paint. And as you can see, now that it dried and the water evaporated out of it, it's not quite as smooth as it was before. And that'll happen when you apply regular joint compound to a wall as well. It will shrink a little bit because the moisture is evaporating out of it. So I will take some very fine sandpaper. This is 220. And any high points that I wasn't able to clean off originally, I'm just going to lightly sand. And you do the same thing on a wall if you were repairing a hole. And then after that, I'm going to apply my second coat, and I can see that this is still not dried out. It's wet, it's ready to go because I had the plastic on there. So I'll put a second coat, and hopefully I'll get away with just 2 coats, but there's a chance I will actually need a third. So once that's all cleaned up, I'll show you the results soon. So I actually let it sit overnight for a full cure, and it actually cured pretty hard and solid. It made a little more structural integrity to this, which is pretty cool, but you can see that it's really not so smooth on the edges, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to sand some of that and clean it up before I paint, because as you know, if you've ever done joint compound on a wall, anything that's not sanded or smooth, after you put the paint on, you're going to notice it. So sanding, it's a painstaking process, especially when you're working with walls, but it pays off in the long run. So make sure you do a good job with it. So the good news is this sands really well, and it's pretty comparable to using like a joint compound if you're mudding a wall. The bad news is it's pretty comparable to using joint compound, which means I'm probably going to need more coats. So after sanding it, you'd have to apply more and then sand and apply more. For the purposes of my model project, I am too lazy to go ahead and do that, and it's going to come out okay. You could see as I'm like sanding down the top here, because it's corrugated cardboard, the hard pieces of the cardboard are kind of being exposed, and I could actually sand those off, and I don't want to do that. The same thing is going to happen on a wall as well. You have paper behind that, and once you start seeing that paper, you should stop sanding and apply more compound. I'd have to actually fill that. But I sanded it the best I could with what I have. My actual mixture has dried out because I didn't seal it so well. But in a pinch, this is actually a good solution. I'm going to paint this and see how it comes out. If I were doing a wall, I would make more and spread it back on. The downside is I don't think it spreads quite as well as joint compound. It could be because I'm doing it on a model project. Maybe I need better tools, as like a taping knife or something. And it also doesn't, it's not water soluble like joint compound, where I could take a wet rag and actually wipe the wall and remove some of it. Because it's paint, it dries, and my only option is to actually sand it. So let me paint this, see how it comes out. So just letting the second coat of paint dry up right now, and it came out pretty good. It would have come out better if I put a third and fourth coat of our homemade joint compound on there. So if you're doing a project at home to repair a wall, I do recommend using the flour and paint mixture that we made. It came out pretty good. It dries pretty hard. You could sand it pretty well and paint right over it. So it's a great alternative, better than using a toothpaste. You'll probably get more professional results with this type of solution. So if you're trying to repair a wall, give this a shot, and let me know how you make out.